Our next step here is going to be to fill in the heads of all three of our kings. So this is two parts. First would be the crown, and then the second would be kind of this semicircle line that defines the face. So to do this, if we come back to our instruction sheet real quick, you can see that I see making the crowns, which you can find in your helpful hints section. And then I've defined each color for us. So we're going to be using 3 strands. I'm going to start here with 783, and we're going to make each crown has 3 different parts. It's got a whipped backstitch outline, some number of back stitches, there's varying numbers on all 3 of them, and then it's filled with vertical satin stitch. So we're just going to work through all 3 of those steps going from outside to inside. So I'm going to start by making a whipped backstitch line. And if you remember from our center gift down below, or the shepherd's hoop, or any other learning really that you've done, we're going to make a backstitch first. So that means we make a regular straight stitch. I'm starting just right here at the bottom. Then we come 1 stitch length up on the line, and then back down into the previous stitch. So I'm going to backstitch all the way across this line, and I'm going to make sure that I'm providing a really awesome point for our crown when I get to the top here. This just means that I'm going to make sure that my stitches end right up into the point, and then as I whip the stitches back the other direction, I'm going to make sure that I emphasize the point again, because it could be pretty easy to stitch through the point and not make sure that it stays nice and clean and pointy like a crown. So I will finish this back stitch, and then we will whip these stitches. Now I'm going to whip the stitches, and it's going to be easiest for me to go from the bottom out, kind of in a rainbow here, as we whip our stitches. Tangle, there we go. So I came out towards the left, which means my next stitch I go under also towards the left, and we're just going to go under each of these stitches just like you would assume. Now here at the point, I could just stick my needle in under here and start whipping again. However, it's going to dull this great accented point I have. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back under the point, put my needle through here to stop my whip stitches, and then I'm going to start again by coming up out under this top stitch, and then I'm going to continue making whip stitches, and this will just accent that point instead of dulling it. This is another one of those situations that if my hoop was not stuck to a hoop stand staying nice and still for you, I would most definitely rotate my hoop. So this is your friendly reminder. Don't feel like you need to hold your hoop straight all the time. Rotating your hoop is your friend. It makes life a whole lot easier. And we finish down in at the end of this first line. Now, next we're going to make backstitch. Pull in our example here. We see that our backstitch is going to go from basically right in the curve up to the point and back down, and we're just making a single line. So if I lay this straight across here, you can see that there's this straight part and then the curve, straight part and then the curve. We're going from curve up, back around to curve. So don't worry about too much where you need to start. Just make sure you leave a little space that is just straight still. And then we're going to make a line of back stitch right next to our whipped back stitch. As always, I'm trying to keep my stitches even as possible, especially since these stitches are going to be seen at the end. They aren't going to be whipped. So as I come towards the point here, I'm thinking, do I have space for 2 or 3 stitches? At this point, I only have space for 2 left, so I'm going to split the space that's left. Stitch all the way up into the point, and I'm going to go back down the other side. All right, at this point, I'm trying to decide how many stitches I need here to fill in the end. And you probably noticed I unpicked some, and I just wasn't happy with how they were coming out. So I'm going to use my needle here real quick to kind of measure straight across so I can visualize better where my stitches need to end. And I think I've got about, oddly 2.5, but more than 2 stitches. So I'm going to stick with this same stitch length. All right, the last thing we need to do is make vertical satin stitches through the bottom. So as always, I recommend that we start in the middle, create a guideline, and then work from side to side. So I'm gonna come up here along this bottom line, because remember, it's easier to come up into open fabric than it is right next to existing stitches. And I'm just gonna lay my needle down to check and see how center that first stitch is feeling. And then once I feel good about placement of that stitch, I'm going to work first to one side and then I'll come back onto the other, just taking my vertical satin stitches right up into under our kind of detail stitches along the top of the crown. All right, I filled in all of our 7/8 right crown, and I've made the back stitch for our center crown, and it is made with 3/829. Again, we're using 3 strands, and now we're going to whip back through the stitches. But unlike the crown here where we're emphasizing the point, on this crown we're not going to overemphasize these kind of half corners here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to whip straight through the whole line. I'm not going to pause and go into the fabric on this one. So instead of trying to emphasize this corner and go down into the fabric, I'm just going to go straight through here and then keep whipping my stitches all the way across. All right, for the back stitch on this crown, you can see here in our sample that we've got 3 rows, or maybe you can't see very well, but I'm going to tell you there are 3 rows of back stitch here, and we're going from corner to corner. So I'm going to come up right here at the corner. I think I can get just a smidge higher and over. There we go. And I'm going to make a line of backstitch across this top portion of the crown. I'm going to err on the side of slightly bigger stitches. I mean, nothing is large here in this crown, but we don't want teeny tiny stitches. We want to have some width to them. It will make the next part a little bit easier. Now what we're going to do is we're going to backstitch the other direction, but I'm gonna match my stitch lengths. So what that's gonna look like is I'm gonna come up directly below this stitch, kind of like I'm doing satin stitch, nice and close here. And then I'm just gonna go down at the same point as this previous stitch. Ooh, caught on my needle minder, there we go. Then I'm gonna come up right next to the intersection of the next two stitches. And then obviously complete the back stitch by going to the previous stitch. And then we're just going to repeat all the way across. I'm going to keep coming up right at the previous row stitch length, keeping these two lines of back stitch close together. And then we're just going to repeat for a third row. Again, doing my best to match stitch lengths as I come back. And after we finish this line of back stitch, we're going to fill in the bottom half of the crown. Again, using satin stitch, I will work from the center out and just fill in the rest of this crown. All right, with our third crown over here, we're using 729, and we have a right angle back corner here that we want to keep sharp, and this point that we want to keep sharp. So as I whip through these stitches, I'm going to be going down into the fabric right here, and I'm going to make sure I'm going under or even kind of next to this point so that the point gets to live out there all by itself and there's no competition for space. And then I will come up underneath the point, whip the top row of stitches, and then I will do the same thing here in the corner, go down and then whip the last two stitches. Now, for this king over here, his head is turned, so we're getting a profile view. So we want to focus our accents on the front half of his crown, which means we're going to be backstitching from the center line, so about here, up to the point, and then just half that distance again. So you can see here in our little sample that I have backstitch from here all the way up, and then these two, the first half, they're doubled. So let's make that happen on this one. I'm going to come up right here at about halfway, and I want to start real close to the previous stitches up here because I want it to kind of look like this stitch is blending into here at the crown. And then I probably can fit about 4 stitches, I'm gonna guess. We shall see. Now, since I ended up with 4 stitches, I'm just gonna stitch 2 back the other direction. So I'm gonna start up here in this corner, and I'll stitch 1 down to here, matching the stitch length, and then 2. I'm again gonna kind of make sure this needle point is really close to the stitches above it. And that gives us 4 stitches to halfway, 2 stitches to 1/4 of the way, which is what we're looking for. And then I'm just going to fill this in with satin stitch once again. However, on this one, given that I have straight sides, I'm just going to start here on the side and work straight across because there's less reason to need to figure out my center angle for this shape. With our third king done, his crown done, the only thing left to stitch is the whipped backstitch for all 3 heads. And since we just did whipped backstitch a few times, you should be well prepared for these last lines of stitching here. So you're just going to go from the tip of the crown all the way through the semicircle, so above the clothes, all the way over to the other side of the head. And then you will whip the stitches, and then you'll anchor off and go on to the next king. Should be pretty easy to understand at this point, as we have learned all the stitches and techniques you need to make this one happen. So I'm gonna speed through this and then we will join together again. All right, we need to trim our tassels so they are no longer loops and just end up being this cute row of fringe. So to do that, step 1 is to take your trusty small scissors. I wouldn't try and do this with like kitchen scissors. And we're just gonna trim each and every loop. Now the important part here is that I am gonna try and pull up away from my hoop, generally speaking, so that I don't catch any of the satin stitches below with my scissors as I'm cutting. All right, so now I'm doing a quick run through with my scissors here. Ooh, I cut that one a little bit short, that's okay. See if I can find any that did not get trimmed and just have everything pointing the right direction. Now that we have everything straightened out and we can see where everything's gonna lay, we need to trim everything to the same length. The trick here is, again, that we don't want to cut anything below, so we need to be able to slide our scissors along kind of, you know, to cut. So what I have found is that if I push all of these guys up, make sure I get them all, and slide the card that came with your needles underneath, and we can do a quick flip and check, make sure that we've got all of the strands. Then I have a surface underneath here that I can work on that won't cut anything else. So I'm gonna take a look and kind of see where my shortest ones are. This one might be my shortest one here. So I think I'm gonna trim to about the length of that shortest one to start, and then we'll pull the card out and check and see how it's looking. So we're just gonna go nice and slow, making sure all of our threads are pointed down, making sure that we're going as level as we can across. I know sometimes that's a lot easier said than done. Okay, before I pull this card out, I'm gonna give a quick comb straight down here, see if I missed any strands. I'm gonna look at it straight on, make sure that I feel level all the way across. I feel like this side is a little bit longer. It's also got one extra string on it. All right, I'm gonna pull this back and dump all the little ends off the card, and then we'll brush this down and see how we feel about it on here. Now, this is great. If you want them a little longer, go for it. I probably am gonna cut off a little bit more just so you can see just a teeny bit more of this French knot in here. because we work so hard to put it there. It would be hate to have it covered up all the time. So I'm gonna follow the same process real quick. It's so much easier mentally and literally just to cut twice if we need to, because as we all painfully aware, we can't make thread grow. We can't make this any longer if we cut off too much the first time. And there you have it. Now you can fluff your fringe up to display it. You could try and comb it down, whatever works best for you. And then at this point, I'm all the way done. If you haven't stitched anything, if you haven't finished up top, move on to there. Otherwise, you have done a fabulous job, and I'm so excited for you. Thank you for stitching with me.